All right, joining me now, Joel Pollak. Welcome to the Alec Show.
Good to be with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. I know you got the new book, The Agenda, What Trump Should Do in His First 100 Days. And I just kind of wanted to start right off the hibbity here. I know you got the forward by Stephen K. Bannon in the book. I just had his daughter, Maureen Bannon, on the podcast here last week. Obviously, they stuck him in the clink. Have you had a chance to communicate? I know she communicates with Steve through emails. Have you had a chance to communicate with him since the book dropped?
Well, in fact, I never even communicated with him when he wrote the foreword. He was interested in the book, and he stepped up and wrote the foreword through the publisher. It was the last thing he wrote before he reported to prison. That's how important the book was to him, and I'm flattered by that and honored by it. But, unfortunately, when someone goes to federal prison, there's a very limited number of people they let you have outside contact with regularly. And I could go visit him in Connecticut, which is where he's being incarcerated, but he is focused on what he needs to be doing and doesn't really want the distraction of outside visitors. He comes back on November 1st, right before the election. Of course, the Biden administration and the courts made sure he was out of commission for the crucial part of the 2024 election. I regard him as a political prisoner. I don't think there's any way to deny that. The January 6th committee in the House was completely illegitimate. It broke its own rules, and it hid evidence. People hid evidence from it. It violated the due process rights of witnesses who were called to testify. And it never had authority to issue the subpoenas that led to the prosecution of Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon. So I regard him as a political prisoner. And that's one of the things I would do in the agenda is pardon all of the nonviolent people who were arrested or incarcerated over January 6th, all the political prisoners this administration has pursued while it's let go all of the rioters from 2020. And, interestingly, Donald Trump is facing potential sentencing soon in the Manhattan case, which is a state case, for allegedly falsifying business records, failing to report payments to Stormy Daniels as a campaign expense, even though they weren't a campaign expense. I wonder how the Bidens and the Harrises kept Doug Emhoff's relationship with a nanny that broke up his first marriage quiet for so long. Clearly, she had some kind of non-disclosure agreement. I want to know if those payments to the nanny were disclosed as campaign expenses, because if they weren't, then under New York state law, Doug Emhoff and possibly Kamala Harris should be prosecuted the same way Trump was prosecuted. Of course, they won't be prosecuted because the point was never to enforce the law. The point was to get Trump. So it's just interesting to me that as this Doug Emhoff story has come out, nobody's asking about that.
Well, Joel, that's a brilliant point. I didn't consider that myself either. That's the first time I've heard anybody make that connection. And I would be curious to hear that as well. Maybe perhaps where did the money come for him to have the abortion too, or for her to have the abortion? But
well, we don't know if she had an abortion. He's not telling us. And that also underlines the idea that there's some kind of non-disclosure agreement, right? Why is everybody quiet about this? So he admitted having the affair, but he didn't talk about the nanny. He didn't confirm or deny reports that she got pregnant. I joked about this and said, my new position on abortion is that I believe that a choice that important should be left to Doug Emhoff. That's, but we haven't heard any follow-up about it. The media are completely uninterested.
You couldn't be more right, and it's definitely something that needs to be. And that if it was the situation reversed, we know that they'd be hammering away if this was somebody in the Trump camp that was doing the same thing or had this same issue going on. But we know that it's a political witch hunt that's been going on, and Trump is about to be sentenced just in a few weeks here. It's going to be curious to see what they do if they're going to try to throw him in prison as well. And it just seems like you said, Bannon was put in prison, and all these things happened while he was away. We had the assassination attempt. You had the Trump Biden stepping down, Kamala getting installed. You had all these things happen. Now, the latest breaking news was RFK Jr. now suspending his campaign and throwing his support and his endorsement behind President Donald Trump. How do you see this affecting the campaign? I mean, it seems like, if anything, we don't have to worry about RFK taking Trump votes away from Trump. So how do you see it?
It's a very positive development for Trump because, as you mentioned, the votes that would have gone to RFK will now go to Trump. Many of them, not all of them, but many of them will go to Trump. That could make the difference in a few key states where RFK was doing very well. In fact, He was polling at about 5% in many of the swing states, and we know how close those swing states have been in previous elections. So 5% is a lot. And if he throws his support, as he has done, to Trump, then he takes those votes with him to Trump, presumably. But the other aspect of it that's important is that RFK confirms that Trump is a legitimate candidate, that he's a candidate with interest in policy ideas. RFK is very serious about policy. You might not agree with him, but he has always taken issues very seriously. And so to have someone like that endorsing Donald Trump sends a message that Trump is a candidate of ideas. He's a candidate who other people trust to get things done. And that's what's very important. It leads to, I think, a little more energy coming into the campaign.
Yeah, good point, Joel. And I was definitely excited to see that RFK Jr. did. I mean, this is a guy that did this despite the fact that he knew the backlash he was going to face from within his own family, from within his own party that he was loyal to for so many years. His own wife didn't want him to do this. So this guy, by doing this, well, he really had to stand on his morals and his belief in order to make this this endorsement, which he knew he was going to face immediate backlash. So I think it was a big deal. Now, you obviously have the book, The Agenda, What Trump Should Do in the First 100 Days. I would imagine the two key points we got to focus on right out of the gate. I know you said the January 6th people, we got to get them pardoned, the nonviolent people on January 6th, but economy and the border. These are two things that he has to hammer on day one.
Well, the border, I think, is the most important issue. It's a national security issue. It is an economic issue. And it's an issue for so many other reasons. I mean, you talk about people coming into our country who don't share our values, who are fomenting some of these riots on college campuses and in big cities. I think we need to have Trump come in and sign executive orders restoring the Remain in Mexico policy, restoring the border wall construction project, ending the free-for-all asylum policies, the catch and release that Biden has been pursuing and Harris has been pursuing, and also start putting sanctions on countries that allow their nationals to come here in large numbers. I mean, there's no reason that these countries should be able to export huge numbers of people who then become a burden on our social services. It's ridiculous. So we should make clear to the countries of origin of these migrants that we're going to count each of these migrants against them, and we're going to apply sanctions to them. The president can do that. He has broad, sweeping immigration powers, and that actually, ironically, was confirmed in the last Trump administration when left-wing groups challenged him on some of his immigration policies, and the Supreme Court confirmed that the president has broad and almost unlimited power on that issue alone. Now, when it comes to the economy, the key is really lowering energy prices. And again, Trump can act immediately on the first day in office by removing the restrictions that the Biden administration has put onto oil and gas development. He can get rid of some of the regulations that Biden and Harris have put into place. He can also help green energy. I mean, green energy is not the panacea Democrats pretend it is, but that's no reason that we can't have a flourishing green energy industry. We need to have every single option. You want to have fossil fuels, you want to have nuclear, you want to have green energy, wind energy. You've got to have all this stuff, solar energy. You got to work on all of it, but you can't do it if you've got all of these roadblocks in place. I think, for example, Trump could actually build the 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations that Joe Biden said he wanted to build. He only built 8 in 3 years because the way Democrats run government, everybody's got to get paid. You've got to make sure, first of all the permits get approved, all the agencies get involved, they all have their say, all the interest groups get to weigh in some sort of public comment period, and then you've got the interest groups that have to get paid, you've got the right unions that have to get hired, you've got the contractors who are friendly with Democratic politicians who've got to get paid, and the money starts cascading through the system, but by the time it hits the actual construction site, there's no money left, and then they go back to Congress and ask for more. That's typical of how Democrats do things. When you have Trump in charge, he says, okay, we're going to build a charging station. I'm suspending these regulations. I'm getting these interest groups out of the way. We're going to find the person who can do it, and we're going to do it in 2 weeks. That's basically what he does. So I think Trump could actually build out some of the things that Biden has funded but never completed.
Yeah, well said. And the Democrats will step over $100 bill to pick up a penny. There's no doubt about that when they have control of the government. And you have, to your point there, too, with these countries, you can't really blame these countries for sending all these nationals to the United States. They're like, well, wait a minute. We have a free opportunity to get rid of these people. Let's send them over there. There's going to be no blowback, no pushback. Why not? And China, meanwhile, is in my opinion, committing an act of war with the amount of fentanyl that they're pushing into our country here, killing and murdering so many of our American citizens and getting away with it scot-free. I mean, there's got to be some harsh pushback on what China is doing when it comes to the fentanyl crisis, and obviously Mexico too, for allowing it to come through our border.
One of the suggestions I have in the agenda is that Trump should suspend all student visas from China. There are hundreds of thousands of Chinese students who study at America's top universities every year. Trump should say there's not one more student visa, not one more Chinese student is being admitted to this country until you stop production of the fentanyl components. China doesn't make the final product. They make basically 90% of the components that then get processed through South and Central America, and they come through the border. So Trump needs to say to China, either you shut down these companies that are making the precursors of fentanyl, or there's not one more student visa that goes to a Chinese student. You'll see those factories close tomorrow.
100%, 100%. I like your style with that. There's no question it has to be dealt with, and it has to be dealt with swiftly and strongly. And one thing I wanted to ask, I know you got a chapter in the book on faith, and I think right now, in my opinion, Joel, I think family and faith are the two things that have been destroyed in this country, that if we can get them back, we can solve 90% of the issues. We got a fatherless crisis in this country. So many kids are growing up without a father or a father figure in their life. You combine that with the fact that the Heavenly Father has been removed from our society. That's been a 1-2 punch that has crippled our nation. And I know that if we could strengthen our faith and strengthen our families, I mean, we would be on fire again in this country. So how do you address faith in your book?
There are many things the president can do without imposing any kind of religion on anybody, but things he can do to restore faith. The White House daily briefing, for example, is probably the most widely watched public meeting in America. It does not begin with an invocation or a moment for reflection. It begins with chit-chat between the press secretary and the reporters that is of no significance to the country. And when you have a Republican president, it begins with reporters trying to grandstand and ask questions that'll get them onto YouTube and viral videos. You don't have a kind of sense that even though they're on opposite sides, we're all in this together. So I think that having a prayer and a moment of silence at the start of the press briefing would be incredible for the country. I also think that President Trump can host members of the clergy from different religions at the White House to offer their spiritual insights. You can listen if you want to. You don't have to listen if you don't want to. But there can be some interest generated in what is happening at the center of our country, at the top level. What insights can Americans take? Can we look to the president for spiritual leadership as well as political leadership? And I think the answer is yes. You know, they talk about the Oval Office being a bully pulpit. Well, we need a little less bully and a little more pulpit. So I think that the president can set the example, and he can start introducing elements of this. Also, you know, it's constitutional to have a moment of quiet reflection. The Supreme Court threw out prayer in school in 1962, but there are things that are allowed. And I think the White House can model those things and demystify them. You know, I don't think anyone's ever been offended by a moment of silence. You know, no one's ever protested about that. I think it's possible just to say, in schools, we're now gonna have a moment where you can reflect, you can pray, whatever you want to do. It's up to you. We're not imposing anything on you. It's important for kids to understand that there's a higher power. It's also important that they understand the adults in their lives also are answerable to that higher power. And I think that gives kids faith, gives them faith, for example, in the system. They also understand that there's a bigger purpose to life other than getting likes on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. And it also makes kids feel loved. I think if people know that they're part of a faith community, that someone in the universe cares about them, then they're not going to feel so alone, and they're not going to feel like there's nothing left for them except fentanyl or except social media. So I think there's so much that can happen, and there's so much Trump can do to restore faith. Again, right away, he doesn't need Congress to help him. He doesn't need the approval of Nancy Pelosi or Hakeem Jeffries or any of these people. They have, by the way, Nancy Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries, they open sessions of the House with a prayer, an actual prayer, not just a moment of silence. They have a chaplain who offers a prayer. Why can't we do that in the White House? Why can't we do that in schools? You know, so I think it's a very important direction that the president can set for the country.
I think it would be great. I think it's definitely a huge hole that we have right now, not just in our political atmosphere, but just in the country as a whole, especially with the youth in this country. As you pointed out, they don't have that moral compass that to guide them in the right direction. I think when you miss that, and especially these kids that are growing up with a broken nuclear family that don't have fathers in the home, you don't have that father figure at home. You don't have that father figure in your life as far as God. It just sets you on a path to disaster, and we've seen it. And I just wanted to get a take here too, because one of the breaking news is also that we had. Well, first of all, you talk about a moment of silence. We just seen President Trump laying wreaths at the anniversary, or you want to call it the memorial for the 13 Afghan service members that were killed in that Afghan withdrawal, the American soldiers, I should say, killed in the Afghan withdrawal, the debacle from the Kamala Harris Biden administration. Both of them were a no-show. They couldn't even bother to show up. And they're saying, oh, it's being political. Meanwhile, you had one of those Gold Star fathers arrested at Biden's State of the Union for calling out the administration for getting his son killed. So what was your kind of take on the wreath-laying ceremony that President Trump was at?
Once again, President Trump shows that he takes the job of being president seriously. Kamala Harris made a statement but did not show up. She won't show up. She hasn't called these Gold Star families in 3 years. She's run away from any responsibility for that decision. She's not ready to be commander-in-chief, and frankly, I don't think she's interested in being commander-in-chief. You know, there was a reporter who passed away who wrote a book about Barack Obama, and this reporter said Obama was interested in what he called the narcissistic life of the presidency. Everybody applauding, standing up when you enter the room, treating you like you're the most incredible person in the world. And in many ways you are. You have incredible power, but not actually doing the things that we require a president to do. I remember back in 2016 when Trump went to Mexico to talk to the Mexican president and Hillary Clinton didn't. And that backfired on her and it made Trump look presidential. Or in 2020 when Trump, when he was president, visiting Kenosha, where there were the Black Lives Matter riots this time of year, I guess it would be 4 years ago today. And Joe Biden said he wouldn't go. And then suddenly after Trump went, he decided he and Kamala Harris were going to go. So President Trump shows up. It's a real difference between him and Biden and Obama and Hillary Clinton. President Trump is not doing this so he can have his face on a dollar bill sometime. President Trump is doing it because he cares about the job and wants to help the country. And that's why I wrote the agenda, because I think you've got to get that message across to people and you've got to tell them what you're going to do. And Project 2025, which was not part of the Trump campaign, has been a very useful punching bag for Democrats. Trump needs to tell people what he's going to do and not let other people define that for him. He needs to put an agenda forward that his own voters understand they're going to get if he gets elected, and that he can use also to defend his campaign in the media.
The agenda, what Trump should do in his first 100 days. I got the link to the book down in the description below. Joel Pollak, one last thing I want to get your take on here is because we just seen the owner of Telegram get arrested in France. And of course, everybody is worried about what is going to be the future of free speech in this country in particular, especially when you have this Alexander Vindman who goes on Twitter and says Elon Musk should be nervous. And they want nothing more than to shut down Elon Musk's Twitter, or we should say X, because it gives people the opportunity to voice their opinions that are not being promoted on mainstream media, which only gives you one side or a limited side of the story. And up until Elon Musk got Twitter, you weren't hearing the stories about the Hunter Biden laptop or anything that had to do with an alternative opinion on anything, especially we know through COVID. We know they shut all that down. So what was your take on the owner of Telegram getting arrested and the threats against Elon?
Well, obviously, it's terrible, and Europe relies on the United States for its defense. So if you're going to rely on us for your defense, don't violate our First Amendment rights. And it's just absolutely outrageous that they arrested the leader of Telegram, that they're threatening Elon Musk. And Vindman, you know, he was one of the conspirators who hatched the plot to launch the first impeachment. He's never been honest with Congress about who the whistleblower really was. If I were Alexander Vindman, I wouldn't be telling other people to be nervous. I'd get nervous, because one of the points in my book that I say Trump should carry out as soon as he becomes president again is he should launch an investigation into the first impeachment. We need to understand who was behind it, because it was an attempt, unconstitutionally in my view, and unlawfully, to overturn a democratic election. It was, in a way, a coup, because it was not motivated by any genuine high crime or misdemeanor. It was a plot that was hatched in coordination with Adam Schiff on the House Intelligence Committee. We never heard who the whistleblower was. The president was denied his basic due process right to confront his accuser. And Vindman is in the thick of it. So, you know, Vindman, I think he needs to be careful, because he has revealed himself to be a naked partisan actor, not some kind of patriot who is standing up for the country's best interest. He's never come clean with the American people. And that's something that Americans need to understand, that our justice system works, that both sides are subject to the same rules. And if you're going to go after Trump over supposedly leading a quote unquote insurrection, well, okay, we're going to go after the people who tried to overthrow Trump undemocratically, and understand who motivated this, whose idea was it, how did they organize it, who was involved, and why have they never revealed all the details to us? I think as much as the JFK files, we need to know what happened in that first impeachment.
No doubt about it. And also, too, I would argue that he has got to be sure who he puts in this administration, because I think the last time that turned out to be a disaster. People were in there to undermine him. And it wasn't that these were people that were pro-Trump and then turned against him. These people were always anti-Trump, and they were wolves in sheep's clothing. And we even seen like one of his press secretaries, Stephanie Grisham, speaking at the DNC, openly admitted she never voted for the guy, yet she somehow became his press secretary. So I think along with the agenda, what he needs to do in the first 100 days, it's got to be keeping an eye on vetting who the heck is allowed inside this administration and getting close to him.
I don't think you can believe anything she says about whether she voted for Trump or not. I got to know Stephanie Grisham on the campaign trail in 2016. She was very nice. She was very supportive of Trump. She had worked for Mitt Romney beforehand. Maybe that was a warning flag, but she hoped that Trump would win. She told me she thought he would win. And I think what happened was she found a way to remain relevant, to sell a book, and she threw him under the bus. Look, I've worked for some important people. I have never written books about them. I don't think that's appropriate. I know we all want to know what goes on behind closed doors, but if you work for someone, and especially if it's a president or a political leader who elevates you to a position of prominence, you don't undermine that trust by then writing a book about what you saw. Nobody cares about you. Nobody cares about Stephanie Grisham. Maybe she has sour grapes because Trump never let her actually lead a press conference. She had some problems in her record. She had some DUI arrests and things like that. And the Democrats were going to make an issue out of it. So maybe he decided that she wouldn't be a great White House press secretary, and she went to work for the First Lady instead. But, you just got to take your opportunities. Most of us would love to work in any capacity at such a high level to have an impact on national policy. I mean, I'm happy doing what I'm doing, but I'm just saying, to the average American, the idea that you would be so ungrateful to the people who gave you that opportunity, it's almost like the ingratitude overshadows whatever she had to say. I don't think you can trust what she said, because I got to know her on the campaign trail in 2016. Maybe she didn't vote for him in 2020, but nobody cares. These people don't matter. And the fact that Democrats have to resort to them shows you how desperate they really are.
Yeah, good point. All right, the agenda, what Trump should do in his first 100 days. Amazon, the best place. Tell the listeners where to go get the book.
Best place is Amazon.com. You can get it in hardcover and in Kindle format. The Agenda by Joel Pollak.
You got it. I got the link down in the description below. Joel Pollak, best of luck with the book sales. I appreciate you giving me a few minutes of your time. Love to have you back on anytime. Thanks for giving me a few minutes today on the Alec Show.
Thanks. Always good to join you.